And I am now recording.
All right.
Sick.
Okay, so again, well, should I call you Alan or Duango AC? That's probably.
Yeah, Duango
Oh, wait,
AC. Duango AC is totally fine.
All right, well, I still know you as Alan, but okay, Duango. I mean, thanks again for coming to talk with us and stuff. I really do appreciate it. If anything, I've been telling Carl about this talk for like a while, so I'm just glad that this whole thing is like coming into fruition, even with this whole virus thing. Still, well, other than that, there's a lot of things I do want to cover in this talk, and I did my homework. I did a lot of homework, so.
I believe you. There's a lot of homework to do.
Yeah.
For sure. But let's get started with, since I know people from Baby Castles, they might not be familiar with TAS. Is it possible you can give us like a quick rundown?
So I am Duango AC. I am keeper of TASbot. TASbot is this lovely-looking guy right here that I have not yet been able to get completely on camera. I've been trying to. He's almost all on camera. There we go. That should work. I wanted to make sure you actually had the ability to see him because he's a fancy-looking guy. This is TASbot. He plays video games for charity at Games Done Quick and other marathons, and I am his keeper. I am also a bunch of other titles. I'm the president of the North Bay Linux Users Group and an advocate for open source software and open hardware. I am the ambassador for TASvideos.org, a website where you can find tool-assisted speedruns, and I am a senior security analyst at Bishop Fox, doing penetration testing during the day.
Yeah. Well, that is quite a lot on your resume. Other than that, well, Carl, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Carl. I'm a meow at Baby Castles. I've been part of the organizing body that runs Baby Castles for I think it'll be it's somewhere in the ballpark of 4 years now. I don't know. Time is a construct. I don't know. But I've been running sound for shows and booking shows and organizing exhibits of video games. Over the course of curating games for exhibits, I got into Doom mods, and getting into Doom mods kind of led me to the Doom speedrunning scene. And I'm very much a neophyte with it. I don't know a lot about, the world of speedrunning, but it's deeply fascinating to me. That sort of anything that's sort of like anything that's sort of I love the sort of the emphasis on sort of like forcing games to do things they weren't meant to do, like.
And, of course, my name is from the original Doom. Duango stood for Dial-Up Wide Area Network Gaming Organization. I was a moderator on the Denver Duango server back in the 90s.
Oh,
Wow.
That is pretty far back. Oh, all right, and for everyone, hi, I'm Kresno, I do stuff, and that's not important. What's important is this interview. All right, so while I was doing some research on speedruns, I saw this whole chat you did for, what was it, DEF CON, and it gave me a whole, well, I was watching it and then I noticed something because you were talking about Doom, and the first real task that's ever been created, it was called Doom Done Quick. Do you know anything about that?
I know a fair bit about that, but I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
Well, my parents didn't like me enough, so I didn't play a lot of Doom. Carl might know.
That's who I was asking.
Not really, honestly. Growing up, I was more of a Duke Nukem kid. But,
fair. Well, you can't go wrong there. Well, the history of this is actually kind of interesting because id Software included in the game Doom the ability to record a movie file of your play right in the inside of the game. Right. And what people discovered is they could play the game at ridiculously slow speeds and still record a movie file. And that led to the advent of some very interesting combinations of tools. If you remember the original Doom, it had save states. It had quick save and quick load because, let's be honest, it was a tough-as-nails game. especially in the ultra hard difficulties. Or what was it? Let's see, Hurt Me Plenty. No, or was that Wolfenstein
Nightmare?
3D? Yeah,
Is
Nightmare
Ultra
would be it.
Nightmare?
Yeah, mostly just Nightmare. But certainly the harder skill levels, you kind of needed to rely on those save states. So it was a mechanic that was already in the game, the ability to take a snapshot of the game's state and go back to it at a later time. And with the ability to record all of the button presses that you had completed, all of the movements that you made with the mouse to that point, it allowed you to do two things that you need to be able to do to make a tool-assisted speedrun. Back up and use superhuman ability to complete things better than you could do on your own. So by using the slow motion or the slow speed playback, playing back at say 10%, and heavily using the save game, the save and load states, they were able to create a sequence of the game that beat it faster than any human could ever hope to on their own. And that led to the first tool-assisted speedrun demo files, which were distributed alongside WAD files back in the 90s, but weren't widely known for that. Do you either of you happen to know what really blew the doors open on tool-assisted speedrun content out in the wild?
I think, wasn't there like this video about like a Japanese player doing something with Mario, and he was like doing like Mario. Well, it was either Mario 3 or the original one.
There's a reason I am playing Mario 3 right here on screen.
Okay, so it was the Mario 3.
It was, and in this case, Mario happens to have desynced, which is kind of funny because he's over here derping in the corner. So I'm going to start it from the beginning, but it happens. But it was, in fact, a run by Morimoto that was not labeled very well. No one actually knew that it was a tool-assisted speedrun. It was in the days of 2003, prior to YouTube even existing. In fact, it was 3 years before YouTube would even be a thing. And it was just this file distributed as a WMV file, Windows Media Video, passed around the internet on various file sharing sites. It was grainy, it wasn't very good compression, it was hard to hear, but you could definitely see that Mario was doing really unusual things. He was getting 99 lives and getting ridiculously close to piranha plants and defeating Bowser in ridiculous ways and never taking any damage. It was just this insane speedrun with 99 lives out of nowhere. And people watched this and went, that is really cool, with one minor problem. Some folks over at Speed Demos Archive were not too thrilled with it. You see, this file was distributed without any disclaimer in English that it was made with tools, and it was passed off as if it was human effort. For those who were paying attention, the sound effects were not correct, but if you didn't know the game very well, or you just missed that fact, you would not know, unless you spoke Japanese, that it was made with tools. So this file, made by Morimoto and circulated around the internet in 2003, was very controversial in the real speedrun community because it looked like, to them, nothing more than a fraud, than somebody cheating, than nothing more than a curiosity. To others, though, it was actually a really big deal. People like Bizquit, who started NES Videos, which is now the site known as TASvideos. He really wanted to catalog these tool-assisted speedruns and make more of them for other games, and that's how TASvideos started all the way back in 2003. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a little bit of that run, and you are dancing with death as Mario. But, yeah, seriously. I mean, other than that, like, let's see, because, like, I know when I was watching, like, some of your runs for, like, tasks, you were talking about how speedrunning is art. Can you, like, get into more detail about that?
I can definitely talk about that. I actually care a lot about this as an art form for a couple of different reasons. What would you be able to do if, as an artist, every time you made a mistake, you could erase it and try again? What if you had a canvas that you could repaint as many times as you wanted and it never grew old? You could just try over and over and over again. And a lot of digital artists are familiar with this. They can undo and try again with art. What we're doing in a tool-assisted speedrun like this is taking a game that was written and set in stone and playing it in a very different and very creative way. When you don't have to worry about human limitations of skill, reflex, memory, luck, when you can play it as many different times as you like and come up with the most ridiculous combination of jumps, like here on the screen, where Mario is just bouncing back and forth between cannonballs because he can. And you, as the tool-assisted speedrun author, can choose what kind of story you want to play. Do you want your character to be in peril? Do you want them to just stand there and barely move as bullets fly all around them and make it look like it's ridiculously easy? Do you want to weave in and out of shots? You can do whatever you like. And as an art form, there's one other thing that we're doing that is not necessarily immediately obvious. One of the things we're running into is these consoles are 25, 30 years old, sometimes more. I see a Commodore 64 behind someone's head back there.
Yep.
These things are great. They still work for now. We already know that the Super Nintendo has components in it that are degrading over time. The ceramic oscillator in the sound processor of the Super Nintendo is no longer as accurate as it was 30 years ago. It has degraded over time. And at a certain point, we won't have this hardware to go play with. We're in this wonderful golden era where I can still get a professional video monitor, a real CRT, where I can still get a working console. But at a certain point, we won't have these things anymore. And I want to preserve not only the work of the original game, but also the work of what was done by the tool-assisted speedrun author in as authentic of an environment as I possibly can for future generations. So I consider myself a digital preservationalist.
Oh yeah,
It's
for sure.
interesting too that sort of like this kind of you touched on something that when you were describing the creating these runs as an artistic practice. My mind jumped to something that you mentioned in a tutorial video, the sort of step-by-step tutorial video on how to make a task where you described these you described it as like a player piano, but for video games, basically.
Well, that's where this gets into a different territory altogether. Right now, we've been talking a little bit about how you make a tool-assisted speedrun in an emulator, where you have the ability to back up and try again as many times as you like, recording your process, or not necessarily, it doesn't have to be in a video game emulator. It could be inside of Doom itself, which had those tools incorporated. But using a re-recording framework or an emulator that allows you to use tools to assist you in playing the game. The next step is much crazier, and that's what you're actually seeing playing out right here. This is TASbot. TASbot is a custom circuit board and a visualization board. In this case, what we call a replay device, what's in this white box, and I've got another one up here you can see, maybe if I can pull it up a little bit. It's just a circuit board that is custom built just to pretend to be a Nintendo controller. And what you have here is, in this case, a Nintendo controller where the buttons have been replaced with LEDs so you can see what TASbot is doing and what he's pressing. These are made by some really talented people in my community. Micro 500 made this visualization board. Onosaurus made the replay device I'm using. And what we're doing is we're pretending to be a real controller. We're sending all the same signals as a real controller, and we're playing back a sequence of predefined button presses in order to complete the game as fast as possible. So what you're seeing on the screen is a real Nintendo being played by TASbot in real time.
It reminds me, it strikes me as almost like a sort of like a video game version of like Conlon Nankaro's player piano music or something. Like this kind of like impossible for a human to do, but like sort of meticulously automated kind of like sort of impossible art, you know?
Yeah. And you're going to see that here in just a second. As certain things happen, you'll see the button presses occur that are impossible for a human to oscillate. Especially certain levels, you'll see that there are just ridiculous button presses that there'd be no possible way for a human to replicate. And you mentioned Conlon, what was his last name? Conlon...
Nankaro?
Nankaro, yeah. I always forget his last name.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but...
You're close enough.
Something like that.
What he did was best akin to what we would now call black MIDI. Here's the thesis here. Think about this for a second. You have a 1918 era player piano. You're past World War I, 1918 through 1920s. Player pianos were a big deal because you didn't have a radio yet. It wasn't that popular, and it was very difficult to use other methods. But a player piano, you could get a paper scroll with perforations that was just nothing more than a predefined sequence of notes that you could play back in a player piano in your own home. And it was just wonderful watching or hearing this music playing from your piano. So people would buy these piano scrolls of different compositions, and they could be made in a couple of different ways. You could have a real human sit down and play it in real time, and you'd have them do a couple of takes while their notes were being punched into perforations in the paper as it went by. And you maybe do that a couple of times until you had a satisfactory result, make a bunch of copies of it, and sell it to people. Or you could compose it, which is more of the process of picking and choosing which notes you wanted to play. Well, at a certain point, a predecessor to Conlon Nencros, we don't exactly know who, made the discovery that humans only have 10 fingers, but there are 88 keys on the piano. So why not add a little bit more punch to things and poke a few more holes there? And he made compositions that were literally impossible for a human to play back. And that's basically what we're doing here. We're nothing more than a series of button presses being played back in a way that are more than likely impossible for a human to pull off.
So basically, we're essentially this version of a player piano, but instead of playing music, we're playing
video games. Yeah, exactly. Now, the modern expression of what he did is embodied in Black MIDI, where you're taking the same concept and you're making compositions that have so many notes that if you look at them in a staff, it just looks like a black mess. And it's kind of an interesting art form.
Oh, Black MIDI is so cool. There's, I feel one of the techniques that people will do is just like, from what I understand, one of the techniques that blackers will do is just like take a bunch of different MIDI files and just slam them together and just merge them and just sort of like see what happens. Which I love that kind of let's throw some MIDI files at a wall and see what happens kind of approach.
Exactly.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
All right. Because I remember hearing like you can listen to the Shrek movie in Black MIDI. I'm not even kidding. This exists.
He's not kidding. It really does exist. It's insane. It doesn't sound great, but you can make it out.
I know. What I find really interesting is that you can literally hear out their voices and lines through the piano note. I don't know. Black MIDI is really interesting in that way. But Carl, what you were saying?
Yeah, that's like using a MIDI sequence to approximate essentially like sort of like a reverse Fourier transform or something at that point, right? Where sort of like these 88 keys become just like act as sinusoid partials, and sort of you get this like gnarly, terrifying sound.
At a certain point, you have to ask yourselves, we stopped bothering to ask if we should. We simply continued on because we could. At a certain point, you have to ask yourself, was it wise to continue on?
To that end, can TASbot take MIDI files as input? What would happen if you fed a Black MIDI file into TASbot and had like Conlon Nankoro literally play Mario 3?
We have done some very interesting things in the past with audio already. But my pipe dream, and if you're listening to this, Martin, I want you to talk to me. My pipe dream is Wintergatan. I want to work with Wintergatan to have a composition done by him that both plays music and plays the game Tetris at the same time by mapping musical notes to button presses on a controller.
That's
sick.
Great. That becomes like choreography, basically.
Yes, that's the idea. Yeah, I would like to see that happen. But we've already done some really ridiculous things with music to these consoles. I can already tell you it's really messy, though. It'll probably break your brain a little bit.
Well,
there was one that I saw a few years ago, like sort of when I was first starting to hang around baby castles. There was an exhibit by an artist called Patrick Lemieux, who does a lot of like hacked Nintendo stuff. And one of the things that he had was two NESs where the sound that were wired together in a feedback loop, where the sound output of one would be turned into controller inputs for the other, and vice versa, so that there were just two Nintendos like playing themselves, and it was just on the original Super Mario Bros. And Mario just kind of kept like falling in the first pit and dying over and over again on like sort of, but in this like sort of like perfectly sequenced delay line on like one TV then the other, one TV then the other.
That's kind of funny. Well, we've certainly done more obscure things than that. We've abused the hardware of Nintendo and Super Nintendo consoles in particular to a great degree. So I'm going to stop here and say, if you don't want to be spoiled, I recommend going back and looking at AGDQ 2017's TASbot block, because I'm about to spoil what we did there if you're willing to listen to a tall tale for a little bit. It's not even a tall tale. It really happened, but it sounds so absurd as to be not real.
I mean, I've already seen it, so...
So, what we
All right,
what we
viewing
started
audience, spoiler warning is passed. Please continue.
I gave you plenty of time. The game you're seeing right here, Super Mario Bros. 3, was our base game for one of the Nintendo consoles we played at Awesome Games Done Quick 2017. And rather than playing it for a long time, we played just the first level, rearranged a bunch of Koopa shells around on the screen, and suddenly triggered a glitch which caused the whole screen to flash, and suddenly you were looking at an old demo scene style screen where there was text scrolling across the screen in weird ways and music playing in the background composed by a good buddy of mine named Fuzzle, and just it was all this crazy stuff. We had a chiptune composer that wrote music specific to the sound chip on the Nintendo. So that was kind of interesting. So we paused that and set that to the side. Then we played Mega Man, and within 45 seconds did a glitch that looked ridiculous, and suddenly we were playing TASbot OS. That was kind of funny. So suddenly on screen you had this operating system appear on a Nintendo screen. It did not look like it had ever existed before. Didn't look like anything anyone had ever seen. And after we let it sit for a while, the screensaver kicked on, and instead of flying toasters, it was flying floppy disks and other silliness. So we set that console aside, and then we started playing the Super Nintendo game Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. And if you've ever seen speedruns of this game, there's a common trope of using bottles in stupid ways, and this was no exception. We started the game by immediately walking straight through a bunch of trees by triggering a glitch, going straight to Kakariko Village while it was still raining, buying a bottle, and then walking back to the sanctuary and drinking the contents of the potion while walking through the door of the sanctuary and triggering a glitch at the same time. And at that moment, if things up to this point were already pretty crazy, everything in the fabric of reality started to disassemble, because at that moment, on the screen appeared the words Super N64, and after a couple of seconds, we were playing Super Mario 64, designed for the Nintendo 64 console, on an original Super Nintendo.
Wait, what? Okay, I haven't seen that part. No, I'm curious. I have to see that now.
Now, the Super Nintendo can only display 256 colors on the screen at one time, so clearly it was not going to look the same. And for various reasons that we'll describe as quote-unquote rendering, we were only able to achieve about 10 frames a second. Also, the Super Nintendo was using every last CPU clock cycle it had, so the only way we could get audio was by using those two Nintendo consoles I told you about. So Super Mario Bros. 3 was pressed into service by sending 54 kilohertz mono audio, 7-bit mono audio to the left audio channel. The other console, other Nintendo playing Mega Man, was the right audio channel. So we had two mono consoles that we were using for left and right audio, and the Super Nintendo was literally displaying 10 frames a second video and showing Super Mario 64 being played on screen in front of a live audience that had no idea what was going on and could not fathom what we had done. And even after we told them, they couldn't believe it. To this day, there are people who don't believe we actually did what we did.
Wow. That is really impressive. And I was going to, I still can't wrap around my head. Like, it would probably look like Star Fox, or like the original Star Fox, but in 10 FPS. Wow.
To be honest, the Nintendo 64 was not exactly known for a great frame rate, so it didn't really look that different other than the low color depth.
Wow.
It was also much smaller resolution, much smaller resolution. We were sending full-frame uncompressed video over the controller ports at at a data rate of about 1.5 megabit per second. It was insane.
I was gonna ask if this was video streaming through the controller port. This wasn't doing things like there are those hacks that people do where sort of like certain button combinations of button presses will like change byte codes and stuff like that.
Well, we started by doing that. That's how we bootstrapped our way in. I mean, the first step was let's talk specifically about Super Mario Bros. 3, because that one's going to be the most obvious of the glitches we triggered. The very first thing we did in that run is we rearranged Koopa shells and kicked them off screen at very specific locations, because in memory you have to store the X and Y coordinates of that shell. So when we took that shell and kicked it off the screen, its last known position on the screen was saved in memory as a byte. And the byte next to it was the next shell, and so on and so forth. And by some chance, it just happened to all be right next to each other in memory. By kicking the shells off of the screen and stomping them in very specific locations, we were able to arrange bytes in memory that were our own block of code. We then triggered a glitch that caused that section of memory to be executed as code, which meant we had a small chunk of of a payload, you could say. So we were able to bootstrap ourselves further. And all it really did, all that little segment of code did really, was it would read the controller for what buttons were being pressed. It would store them in memory, go back and read, again, store it in the next byte in memory, and write out those in a scratch area. And at the end, it would go back and execute them. That allowed us to press buttons on the controller to then execute more commands on the console. And slowly, one step at a time, we bootstrapped ourselves up to the point where we had complete control of the entire console. And then we shoved an entire payload into memory, which allowed us to play mono audio at 54, it was 7-bit, 54 kilohertz mono audio on the Nintendo, pushing it to an extreme that had never been heard of before. The console has an audio chip in it that's capable of playing that type of audio, but there was never enough storage on the cartridge to handle that. So no game ever used it. No game could ever have that kind of fidelity. The best you could get was kind of the steel drum effect you hear in Super Mario Bros. 3. The doo-doo-doo-doo kind of noise you hear in the background music. Normally, they had to be very, very short files in order to fit in memory, and usually at a lower quality level. What we demonstrated was we eliminated the storage restraints by streaming the audio through the controller ports.
Yep.
So we pushed the Nintendo to its very limits of design capability.
Because you don't need to worry about how big of a file you can keep stored on an EEPROM or whatever, because you're just streaming to a buffer that's updating, right?
Exactly. And then we used Linux, obviously. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the North Bay Linux Users Group. In fact, I'm recording this on Linux using Jack Audio to route my audio around my computer. I'm doing everything in Linux. TASbot is being played back by a Linux system right now that my cat is currently laying on, so hopefully it doesn't overheat.
Oh, wow.
But
I was curious. I know that I read that the original version of TASbot was driven by a Raspberry Pi, and
We tried.
And I was wondering, what's that?
we tried. It was a valiant attempt. Ultimately, it failed. But what we ended up doing was using a Raspberry Pi in conjunction with another circuit board, a replay device like this one up here, that basically allowed us to buffer the input from the controller, and then we were able to drive the whole thing with a Raspberry Pi. Originally, I called this whole conglomeration of parts, the Legos, the controllers, everything else, I called it Robberry Pi. Terrible name. Fortunately, someone else in their right mind came up with the idea of calling him TASbot, and the name's stuck ever since. It was Mecha Richter in a forum thread back in 2013.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Speaking about Mecha Richter, can you tell me more about your history with AGDQ?
Well, in 2011, I believe it was Micro 500 made the very first Instructables guide on his NES bot, and someone named Dark Kobold made one with a breadboard in a shoebox, and he took it to the Summer Games Done Quick 2011 event, which was held in the basement of Essentia's house, if I'm not mistaken, and it worked-ish. It desynced on the last boss, but again, it was a bunch of wires on a breadboard in a shoebox, so it wasn't very well put together for reliability's sake. So that was the first time that a tool-assisted speedrun was featured at a Games Done Quick event, but it was way in its infancy, and everything was kind of not very well put together at the time. And in 2013, I really wanted to go to a Games Done Quick event because these events were raising money for cancer prevention. It was a cause I cared about deeply after losing family members to cancer, and I really wanted to do something. My first take was, I bet I can find a way to speedrun the game Scribblenauts Unlimited and submit that. And then it dawned on me very quickly that I don't actually know how to run a mouse that fast, and I suck at real speedrunning. So I went back to my roots, looked at what content we had, went, oh yeah, well we could show tool-assisted speedrun content. Some folks there in the Speed Demos archive had managed to grow past their hatred of the original Super Mario Bros. 3 Morimoto run, and had realized that tool-assisted speedrun content was actually feeding glitches back into the real-time community, and they were accepting of the idea of showing tasks at Games Done Quick. So I organized a team of people and had no idea what I was getting myself into. I really had no idea of the scope of what I was facing or what we would need to do to make it all work. And that first year, you can see I was younger. I had no idea what I was doing in front of a camera. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have the knowledge. I was figuring out how to organize teams. It was kind of chaotic, but we did some really amazing things in that first AGDQ appearance back in AGDQ 2014, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, considering that spoilers, seeing the Brain Age TAS was just like,
Huge credit to Micro 500. He put in so much time on that, and it's regrettable that he's chosen to step out of the community because he's such an amazing and dynamic man. He did a lot of work on that and put a lot of effort into the artwork. I think it actually burned him out, though. It was just such a huge amount of effort to draw that all by hand. And we had a massive amount of collaboration. That was really art. I talked earlier about this being art, but art is in the eye of the beholder. Sometimes it's hard to quantify, well, is this really art? But we literally drew images on the screen, and you cannot argue it. That was definitely art. And we collaborated with a large number of artists to create the different meme-oriented graphics that we displayed on screen while answering math problems with the correct answer. If you've not seen the Brain Age TAS, again, spoiler alert, go watch it. It's probably our best work from an artistic perspective because we would be answering the question, what is 5 plus 5? We would draw the picture of a dog's head, and the game would say, yep, that's the right answer.
that's education.
It was education. I don't know what we learned, but we learned something.
I mean, I mean, I'm glad to have learned that 5 plus 5 equals dog.
Oh wow. Still, actually, this goes back into like, actually, yeah. What about MagFest? Because I know this year at MagFest, I hung out with you, and we were having issues with Donkey Kong Country too. Can you tell me more about that?
Can I, or do I want to? Can I tell you? Can I tell you stories about Donkey Kong Country 2? I probably can. Yeah.
Oh wait.
So, Donkey Kong Country 2. This game. Yeah. Donkey Kong Country 2 is a right pain. And I'm going to show you something here really quick. I actually have a setup here that is worth seeing. I'm going to demonstrate as carefully as I can what we did to try to fix this. I'm going to unhook this wire right here and this one right here. This is a Super Nintendo. And it is actually completely unmodified, believe it or not. This Super Nintendo has an SD to SNES cartridge in it, which we can use to put debug ROMs on. Uh-oh, I think Discord crashed. Oh, Discord.
Coming back.
Oh, Discord, why did you crash on me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I'll fix it. There you go. I love it when Discord crashes at random moments in the middle of recording a call. So we must have been frightened by the Super Nintendo, seeing as we have in the past put Discord chat clients on bizarre hardware, but that's another story for another day.
It's like a They Live moment to see the thing without its faceplate.
Yeah, so this is an I have not modified this Nintendo at all, but you will see this wire sticking out of it. This goes to a little blue, if I can get it the right just light, you see that blue dot there? That blue dot is a ceramic oscillator. This is the audio processing unit on a one-chip Super Nintendo. And what we've done is connected this to an FPGA to override the existing clock with our own clock signal. And the reason we are doing that is all about Donkey Kong Country 2, because, oh my goodness, this game has given us so much trouble over the last several years. There is a panel talk that we recorded at MagFest, which is finally up. The audio was not recorded great by some irony, but we did get it up on my Discord. I'm sorry, on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/DewangoAC. You can find that panel talk from MagFest 2020 about what we have had to do to try to test Donkey Kong Country 2 and eliminate non-deterministic behavior. I'm going to pick this up one more time. What's up?
Wait, it took you like, what, 3 years of working on that, right?
Yeah, we're still not completely done. But what I can tell you is underneath this metal plate, underneath this plate is the main CPU of the Super Nintendo. And what's back here, this chip here, is the audio processor of the Super Nintendo. There are two completely separate clocks. The main CPU runs on a 21 megahertz quartz crystal. That blue thing you saw earlier, that little pill-looking thing, that is a ceramic oscillator running at 24.57 something. It's so inaccurate that there's no point trying to go any more digits than that. And it is proven to be so ridiculously unstable that it can change 100 hertz in just over temperature range changes.
Wow.
Or like by leaving the console on too long. It's wildly aged badly. And other consoles are in the same state. Those parts were supposed to only degrade so much over the course of 10 years, but that is a lot more than 10 years now. These were made in the 1990s and 1991. So these consoles have degraded to the point now that they're way out of tolerance. And what we're trying to do is to hook up an FPGA, a field programmable gate array. I've got one right here. This is an FPGA that is providing a clean clock to the Super Nintendo for the purpose of allowing us to try to get more accuracy. Because basically what happens when you've got both the CPU and the main audio processor on completely separate clocks, it needs to move the audio data from the cartridge through the main CPU and transfer it to the main or to the secondary audio processing unit, the secondary standalone sound generator, you might say. There are two completely different clocks, and if one of them is suddenly spinning at a different speed, your audio transfer takes a different amount of time, and suddenly your inputs are on a different frame. And instead of cleanly jumping on the enemy and sailing right over that pit, you run right into the enemy and fall right down into spikes, or a number of other horrible things, and you end up derping in the corner.
So like a desync?
That's a desync. And non-determinism is the bane of our existence. Imagine a player piano the roll is going through the piano, and then suddenly the paper jams. Now, as a player piano, it doesn't know that anything went wrong. It's just going to keep spinning, and the paper is just going to do whatever the paper does. I can guarantee you that it will not sound right, but it'll keep trying to go. Well, that's what TASbot does. The only thing we know is that the console is ready for the next frame of input, and when we get offset, things unravel, usually in chaotic and hilarious ways. We need things to be deterministic. We need it to be repeatable. And one of the things I should note on these games, the reason this works at all is because in these original games, there was no concept of true randomness. The only source of randomness was player input. It was used to seed a pseudo-random number generator so that you would get, for instance, random locations of Hammer Brothers on the map. But when you're dealing with a player that can consistently press exactly the same sequence of button presses every single time, your pseudo-random number generator is always seeded with exactly the same values and always produces exactly the same results. That's how we're getting deterministic behavior, even though the games technically have randomness in them.
Wow.
So getting back to Donkey Kong Country, just to kind of finish this off, this game has given us so much grief. We really want it to work. We are getting closer every day. But we're using absurd methods of using an FPGA to generate a much cleaner clock signal and looking at how to change it as the game is playing if for some reason, because we still can't control the difference between when the CPU is sending data and the APU is receiving it, speeding up and slowing down that processor in order to keep up with what the CPU is sending it. Basically, I'll phrase it this way. The original software developers who made these games were given a specification that said, this part will run at this speed and can do this many operations per second. And they wrote the game based on the information they were provided. We now have consoles that do not behave the way the original software developers were told the hardware would behave. So our goal is merely to make the console work the way the software developers were told it would work.
Right, return it to spec.
Yes.
I'm a little curious. How did you? It almost. I mean, for sort of like replacing a clock generator. At first, I'm not super knowledgeable with hardware stuff, but it seems like an FPGA is sort of like
Overkill?
Yeah, it sounds like overkill. So I'm just curious, sort of like what brought you to that as your solution?
Earlier failures. This is a different console. This is also a Super Nintendo, but this one is an old, it's not a one chip. You can actually see, if you look carefully, I've got all these blue debug wires. It's not technically modified except for one thing. And that one thing is that on this particular board, this is the audio processing unit, proving that it really is its own thing. So the console I showed you earlier was a later design. It was called a one chip. This is what they originally shipped with. It had all kinds of different components. And the one I'm going to show you that I care about the most is this tiny little horse trough-looking can that I've got my finger pointed at right there. That horse trough-looking can is not the original part. The original part looked like that blue bulb. The original part was a ceramic oscillator. This is a replacement chip. This is a can that runs at 24.576 exactly, which we thought, based on measurements, was the correct speed. Turns out it's not. But so we have tried methods where we've tried to set a much more accurate quartz crystal oscillator, or I'm sorry, quartz crystal timing method, and that was not enough on its own to do it. It still desyncs with this console. No, it was not our first choice.
Wow. But yeah, that just sounds like a whole adventure and a half with that game itself.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. And ultimately, the Super Nintendo is more challenging than the original Nintendo. This original Nintendo can still desync. If I create too much static electricity and touch the cart, I'm going to desynchronize this run, as you saw earlier in the recording, where Mario was suddenly stuck in a basement. These things happen really easily. When you're talking about something that has 60 inputs per second, because that's what an NTSC television ran at, every second it's polling the controller for input 60 times. We have to precisely and perfectly not only do 60 frame perfect inputs, but it's actually more complicated than that, because the way the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo ask the controller for input is it sends a latch line. It says, hey, latch, controller, I'm about to ask you what buttons you're pressing. Clock, give me back the first button we've agreed upon in the predefined sequence. So you've got, for instance, up, down, left, right, select, start, A, B. Well, maybe you've agreed that A is your first button. Okay, tell me, is A being held down? Give me a 1 if it is, or a 0 if it isn't. Send me a high voltage if it's held down, 0 if it isn't. Clock, give me the B button. Is it held down? Clock, give me select. Clock, give me start, whatever the order is. So it clocks 8 times. So not only do we have 60 times a second where it's asking us for input, for each of those 60 times it's asking for us for input, we have to precisely and perfectly respond to every clock cycle, or clock request. It's amazing that this stuff works at all when you start talking about runs that are 45 minutes long. And a single static shock, and you've now desynced the whole thing.
Would you? So then, if you had to, so then would you have to? What would you? If you wanted to run TASbot on like a PAL machine, would you have to just build a completely new TASbot or something?
Well,
or
PAL
could
runs
you
at
just
50.
reset it to run at 50 frames?
It would work, but most speedruns are not made on PAL simply for the reason that it is slower. PAL runs at 50 frames a second instead of 60. The games were generally handled, the way they handled that in various ways was generally bad. If you are in the European Union or anywhere else that has a 50 hertz PAL signal standard, I'm very sorry for the second-rate nature of your gaming experience.
Oh.
Well, because sometimes they would port games from NTSC, which is the 60 hertz standard used in both the United States and Japan, and they would port them to Europe simply by slowing the game down.
Right. Yeah. Sonic the Hedgehog famously runs like, 10 hertz slower on PAL machines.
Yeah. Sorry for you guys. But yes, it would work.
Yeah. It would work. Okay. Yeah. Theoretically.
Oh wow. All right. Well, I mean, considering we talked about like some not so fun times with TAS, I mean, can you tell me about like the most fun you've actually ever had doing a TAS? Because I remember when I was looking back in your stuff, you were doing NetHack.
Oh wow.
And it was like a lot of. I mean, you beat that in like what, less than 10 minutes, and it blew my mind when I was watching that run. I was gonna ask, do you know anything about Dwarf Fortress?
Oh, well, let's talk about modern TASing. Okay, so obviously you have to have some framework, whether it's built into the game like Doom, or whether it's built in an emulator that the game is being run in. And in the case of these NES and SNES games, Sega Genesis, all these other old consoles, you're doing it inside of an emulator where re-recording capabilities have been added in after the fact. For modern games, it's sometimes tricky. It's hit and miss on whether or not it's possible to do this. Even on modern consoles, it's hit and miss. Well, frankly, it's even hit and miss for older consoles. I don't know as if a PS2 emulator will ever be perfectly accurate because that design of that console was so bizarre. And PS3 is right out. You try synchronizing 6 different processors. So with a game like... with a console like the Wii, things are actually advancing very fast. The Dolphin emulator is very accurate and quite usable. We've done games like Super Monkey Ball that just look amazing for the GameCube. We've done other stuff for the Wii U that's pretty accurate. It's coming along very fast. But if you want to move over to PC games, that's where Linux comes back into play, because Windows does not have a great track record of re-recording tools. There is a tool called Hourglass, specifically made for Cave Story, that can work for Cave Story, and might possibly, if you're really lucky, work for something else, but don't hold your breath, and you are going to hate your life while you use it. On the Linux side, there's a tool called libtas, made by Keeley. Keeley? He is amazing. He has wrapped a set of re-recording tools around SDL-based games in Linux. So if a game has a Linux port, there's at least a decent chance that you can make a tool-assisted speedrun of it. So I don't know about Dwarf Fortress per se. We could go look at it and poke at it. But that capability is what allowed us to do tool-assisted speedruns of games like SteamWorld Dig 2, which I really love. That game is amazing. Or Celeste, which is widely known as a speedrunning game.
Oh, wow. Actually, hey, Carl, because, like, we actually were talking about this beforehand, and I think it might be possible. There is a game that Carl created using a Wii. Carl, you might...
yeah. Well, I can't take sole credit for it. It was me. Because I did none of the programming work on it. But
hang on.
Oh no. Donkey Kong Bath Time is 100% a game that could be speedrun. So Donkey Kong Bath Time. I don't know if you were at this past MagFest. I don't know if you swung by I don't know if you saw the Baby Castles booth in the indie art. But there was a game. You got in a bathtub and there was a Wiimote strapped to a big scrub brush, and you just had to like shake it as fast as you possibly could to sort of scrub Donkey Kong, and it was kind of on rails Donkey Kong in a barrel with a shower head covered in soap bubbles. And yeah, no, I mean, all it's doing is listening for acceleration data. There's no position tracking happening at all, but so like literally it's just how violently can you shake the controller is the only control input that matters.
That's kind of
so
fun.
I mean, this seems it seems like seems like prime fodder to just be totally brute forced by like a tool assisted run.
I mean, it would, if anything, would be score attack.
Right. It's on rails, so like the timing wouldn't change, but like it would be like you'd be able to get an impossible high score.
That's usually not the motivation for playing a game as fast as possible, but certainly
Sure.
This is an auto-scroller right here. You're basically in Mario. We're now in the 8th world, and Mario has to wait for this ship to get there. So he's derping around and doing all kinds of silly tricks and glitches and running off the end of pipes and or well, whatever you want to call those characters. Anyway. The wrench throwing dudes that I can never remember the name of, and I should really know, but I always forget their names. Anyway, there's all these glitches that are being triggered here because you got to do something entertaining while you're waiting for the level to end. So
right.
Certainly, you could do something like that if you wanted to, but no, it is good though that we're getting the ability to task modern games.
Mm-hmm.
So you were actually asking about NetHack earlier.
Yes.
I don't know if you actually want to know this, but.
Maybe.
The NetHack TAS is an example of, well, maybe you could call it hubris. We thought it would be a lot easier. We've been working on the NetHack TAS since 2010, so it's over 10 years of work on this thing. We are at over 500,000 re-records. In other words, we've backed up and tried something again over 500,000 times over the course of 10 years.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about re-records because I remember watching the Final Fantasy run, and you said around there it was like 10,000 re-records for that. Like, I think it was like a no reset run.
Yeah. And that was actually
like,
low because his previous attempt had hundreds of thousands of re-records. It only took him tens of thousands for that one where he resynced it.
But like 500,000 for that NetHack?
Well, admittedly, some of them are automated, but to give you an idea of the complexity of some of the things we're doing, I'm going to momentarily break your brain. If you've never heard of NetHack, just assume you're playing Diablo. Procedurally generated, random enemies. They are various tropes of different types of enemies. Now, imagine in your mind's eye for the moment, because that's about all you can do with NetHack. It's a text-based game. Your character is literally usually an @ sign or something. Your feline cat is a lowercase f. It's not like there's a lot to work with here, but in your mind's eye, imagine the following scenario playing out in front of you. We walk into a level polymorphed into a stone giant, and we are currently holding a cockatrice corpse, which, if you know your lore, if you touch it, will turn you to stone, but we're already stone, so it doesn't matter. We walk up to a nymph, and we use a spell called Charm Monster. The nymph becomes our pet and attempts to walk toward us. We drop a pile of gold on the ground, which the nymph picks up and attempts to apport to us as our pet. We then hit the nymph with our rubber chicken, with our cockatrice corpse, turning our nymph into a statue and angering our deity, causing thunder to roll in the background. We then use stone to flesh on the statue of the nymph, which causes the nymph to come back very, very angry because we heard it last time it saw us. We then use Charm Monster on the nymph again, and it becomes our happy pet and drops a pile of gold on the ground that it had as a statue, and drops a pile of gold it had as our pet, which then merges into a pile of gold on the ground twice as large as what we started with. Lather, rinse, repeat until we overflow the 32-bit signed integer, at which point we pick up negative 2.3 billion weight gold, which imparts negative 2.3 billion weight on our inventory, at which point we polymorph into a queen bee and fly out of the room with 5 full-size Minotaur statues.
Yep. That's a roguelike.
Yep. Manipulating all of these things into
serious,
happening is crazy, though.
This is some Imhotep is invisible shit. Like,
But that's how we got infinite carry capacity in our inventory, by having anti-gold, as we called it, because gold in memory had weight, and we reversed the weight, so it did its calculations backward. And this is just one part of it. We think it will probably take us a fair bit more time to succeed, but our goal is to ascend in NetHack in 2003 turns.
Wow.
Now, this might not seem like much, like that's a big of a deal, but you have to wait until turn 2000 until you can complete the quest. So you have to complete your quest and ascend in 3 turns. And that's what we're actively doing, and we have a plan to do it. It's just so much minutia and so many things that have to be manipulated to happen, so many improbabilities that have to line up, that it has taken quite a number of years to get progress on it. And it's actually been stalled for the last year, but free time, what is that?
Especially now.
Well, I'm still working from home in the midst of COVID-19 as we are recording this.
One thing I'm curious about is sort of the techniques that sort of like that you find and exploit for these games. How much of it is sort of repeatable tactics, like sort of like figure out a way to overflow, sort of like overflow a buffer or whatever, and sort of and how much of it is just totally trial and error, and how much of this varies game to game? Like how much of this is sort of like just like a repeatable sort of technique, and how much of this is like particular to just NetHack or just Super Mario?
So a lot of methods and methodologies and techniques will translate from one game to another. For instance, on a platform game, well, Mario just totally destroyed Bowser, but anyway, on a platform game like this, you're going to use different mechanics than you're going to use in a roguelike. In this case, it's going to be, hey, I wonder if I if I move so fast that I get my head embedded in the block, what will the game do? And in the case of Super Mario Bros. 3, it will try to eject you from that block, and it means that you can do a corner boost. You can get into the block a little bit, and the game forces you out of it and increases your forward momentum. That same technique is applicable to a lot of other platform games, because you have to have some kind of object collision, and anytime you have a character move into an object at a certain speed, you might get embedded partially in it before the game can do the calculation on where your character is. So those techniques will translate to another game just fine. There's also the idea of just sheer persistence and glitch hunting and all kinds of other aspects of it. Some TASers are well known for finding ways to clip out of bounds, or mechanics that allow you to break the game in various different ways that are then incorporated into real-time runs. So that's its own skill, but it's applicable everywhere. If you are a good glitch hunter, you can find glitches in any game. No game is perfect. It works exactly the way the programmer wrote it when they released it, and it turns out that most games don't exactly behave the way the original developer thought they did.
Oh. Well, wait. How much time do you have left?
How much time do you want this podcast to be?
Up to Carl.
We've been talking for just about an hour now. the next thing on the calendar for our streaming schedule is at 8. So I don't know if I've got another hour of this in me.
I mean,
but
I can
we're
probably
not
go
in any.
Yeah, I mean, I can go for like another 20 minutes.
Ask
That's
all the
exactly what
questions
I'm
you like. I'll give you the best answers I can. We didn't even touch on things like the charity aspect of
know.
this.
Oh, I know. Like, I'm sorry. I'm like ingesting all of this like quality content here.
Well, I hope it's quality. It's content. I don't know about quality.
Hey,
Unintelligible
like-
content, maybe.
well, I actually was going to ask you about. I mean, I remember you were doing a road trip with Tas. I think you did it with the Axeman, right?
Yes,
What was
and that became really crazy. So, imagine for a moment, if you can use tools to assist your enjoyment of playing a game, what if you use tools to assist your enjoyment of driving your car across the country? Just to say it out loud, this is not necessarily a good idea, but we did it anyway, and we did it for charity. So the Axeman and I got in a Tesla Model X 100D that I managed to purchase with Bitcoins back in 2017. That's a whole other story for another podcast. And I managed to hook it up with Warp World's crowd control. There's a well-known hacker named Jakku who has put together a company named Warp World. They have a tool called crowd control that's generally used for allowing streamers who are playing the game Super Mario. I'm sorry, not Super Mario. Well, that one's available too, but Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is especially popular. It allows viewers at home to donate bits in order to cause various effects to happen to the streamer. So maybe a viewer at home attacks them with chickens, or suddenly causes them to have ice physics, or takes away all of their bombs when they're about to do a bomb jump. Players at home control people in all kinds of interesting ways. We took the concepts of crowd control and applied it to our car. But of course, we did it in a safe way. We did it with all of the infotainment stuff. You could skip songs, or you could mess with the radio volume. You could use the tool that allowed you to specify which GPS destination to go to and randomize what location it was suggesting you navigate to, without changing how the car worked or anything like that. You could...
What voice the automated assistant talks in and that kind of thing?
That would be fun. I'd like to do that at some point. But specifically, the thing we really gave them control over was the climate. We gave them the ability to turn on the seat heater, the steering wheel heater, each of the seat heaters on either side of the car, turn up the
like a
temperature of the
gamble.
car. Oh, it was a gamble. They got it up to 118 degrees internal temperature of the vehicle. I took off my pants on stream. It was pretty crazy. And then to help me out, they reduced the temperature to 60 degrees.
Well, that was nice of them.
That was nice. And then I grabbed a blanket because it got cold. But we did it as a donation incentive for various different things. Let me back up and try that again. One of the other things we also did was a Tesla does not have a tailpipe. It is a completely electric vehicle. So when you talk about enabling emissions testing mode on a Tesla, it's not talking about the car. It's talking about you. The result was that we managed to get the donation incentive met, and we enabled the ability to cause farting noises to happen every time we use the turn signal.
Wow.
And this is built into every Tesla, by the way.
This is
The technology that goes into it.
We
The
have
fact
the
that,
technology
like-
to build electric vehicles, and what are we using it for? Making the car fart.
Beautiful.
So,
I love that the car has an API and that this is what you can do with it.
Yes.
Like,
yeah, which we had
sort
to
of, like,
reverse engineer,
both
but
parts of that.
and credit to Jakku for that. At the end of the day, the results were actually really amazing. We raised, I believe, over $100 an hour of the drive to National Alliance on Mental Illness. Could have been better, but it was our first run at it. We didn't have a lot of publicity. We were going to do our second year this year, and unfortunately, it did not quite work out right. My audio is beeping at me. It did not work out very well. We just didn't have enough time before COVID-19 totally blew everything out of the water, and it looks like we'll be delaying until October. So we hope to still do Desert Tesla Charity Drive again this year. I hope to get Tesla to actually sponsor it. I'm looking forward to working with the folks at NAMI again. We'll be doing that drive on our way to RPG Limit Break, which is one of my favorite Games Done Quick inspired events. It has a similar feel, but it's just more homey and close-knit, and it's just a really great event to go to. So if you ever get a chance, RPG Limit Break is definitely a good one to be at. But yeah, that we've branched out to a lot of really crazy things we've done for charity. The events just keep getting bigger and more insane. And this year was by far the most absurd because we had an hour worth of content at Awesome Games Done Quick 2020. And in an hour of time, we raised over $179,000 for cancer prevention research just from the TASbot content. The marathon as a whole raised over $3 million for the Prevent Cancer Foundation. So it's been a really amazing ride. At this point, the TASbot community has grown to the point where there's over 2,500 people on our discord.tas.bot server. It's a wonderful community. If it wasn't for having all those people, we wouldn't be able to do the breadth of content we can make. We've been able to raise over $900,000 for various different charities, including Prevent Cancer Foundation, Doctors Without Borders, National Alliance on Mental Illness, Alzheimer's research in Sweden as part of ESA, all kinds of other things. And it's just been a really amazing journey.
Yeah, didn't you say that you said that sort of the charity aspect was something that had attracted you to AGDQ to begin with, right? So was that sort of something that was a motivation for doing this project, like sort of from the very beginning?
Very much so for me. Yeah, it was almost all about charity for me. And the fact that we get to break cool stuff in the process of it is pretty amazing. And the way it works, if you're not familiar with these Games Done Quick style events, like how on earth are you raising money by having a video game played by a robot? That doesn't make sense. We usually do donation incentives. Hey, if we reach this goal of X dollars by this time, TASbot will play the original NES Tetris and is going to completely obliterate Mode B in a matter of a minute. And people are like, whoa, I want to see that. So they donate to see that incentive. And that's just built up over the years. There's a lot of brand recognition with TASbot these days and stuff like that. Although we do have a bit of a problem. He's almost too big. And TASbot is based on a Rob robot. We need to replace him, unfortunately, because we are probably very close to making Nintendo upset at us. So we are building a new frame.
A Rob 2.0?
Well, we can't do Rob. We can't do Rob at all. We have to build our own design that is, it can be inspired by it, but it has to be able to pass its own trademark. So we are building kind of a chibi TASbot that's a lot cuter in design, but still very familiar, looks a lot like him. And adding in LED eyes so that these eyes can light up, are a little bit larger in size, things like that.
Oh, wow.
Resemble but legally distinct from
Yes.
Rob.
Yeah. And it's subtle things. Like, he still has two round eyes, but you're not going to file a trademark. Oh, it has two eyes. Like, there's at least some grace here. So we've completely redone the area in the middle of his head. This outer frame is completely different. He's got a completely different appearance on the side. This isn't geared the same way. But it is still a head with a shaft, and some things you can't change. There are only so many different ways you can build a robot with a head on a pole. So,
Oh. Wow. Well, if anything, let's see. There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about. And that was like, during your events, it's usually always something that goes wrong. Can you tell me like the one time that just things went really well for once?
RPG Limit Break, Final Fantasy, flawless. Commentary was on spot. We had Geyer, G-Y-E-R-E. G-Y-R... No, I totally misspelled his name. Geyer. He's a well-known real-time speedrunner. He provided amazing commentary alongside the Axeman, who was the original author of the Final Fantasy TAS. No one walked near that console the entire time, which was good because static electricity and electromagnetic interference are our enemy. No one did anything silly. Everything went the way it was supposed to go. I was very happy with that outcome. So that one went very well. And honestly, we've had a few events that have gone well. I'm going to be honest. AGDQ 2017 went really badly. AGDQ 2019 went really badly. We tried a very aggressive technique of, instead of having controller buttons sent through a cable with electrical signals, we decided to stab a Nintendo DS screen with a stylus. It worked. It was terrifying. Go look at Mashbot. It was not well received.
Wow.
We just didn't have everything prepared. I would say that AGDQ 2020, much better. We had, I delegated a lot more. TyKevin83 took on a lot of the work for organizing that. I've had to delegate as our event count has gone up. Last year alone, we did Bot Bash Charity Brawl. Well, technically that was the end of 2018, but MagFest there, of course, and at the time was Mega Manathon. It's now MagFast. We did Awesome Games Done Quick 2020, RPG Limit Break, and Desert Tesla Charity Drive directly prior to it. Summer Games Done Quick, European Speedrunner Assembly. It was just a chock-full year of so many different events. MagWest Go. I helped organize all of the content there with all the folks there at MagWest Go's leadership team. I want to thank you guys for that. You know, you were partly involved in the background on that.
Oh yeah. Shout outs to Fawful, because this is actually from me meeting Fawful, that's how I met you.
Oh, I see.
I mean, from what I remember though, that oh yeah, and also again, thank you for taking me to In and Out. I really do appreciate that.
That was fun.
That was fun.
So we just did so many events last year that we just had to start delegating. I didn't have enough time left in my day, and even now it's a strain to get everything done. So we're always looking for more volunteers. You do not require any specific skills. Just come on into the community. We're at discord.tas.bot. It's the best place to get involved and plugged in. HTTPS tas.bot is the main site where you can find links to other runs that we've done in the past. The GDQ VODs page is kind of awkward for me because if you sort by runner, I now have more runs than anyone else, which I didn't expect. But it has a full listing of everything we've done at Games Done Quick events. We've got, of course, I do stream on Twitch. I'm at twitch.tv/DewangoAC. If you want to see live insanity, like the lights around me suddenly changing different colors, by all means tune in. We also love to do things like change the sound of my voice and turn me into a demon and silly stuff like that. Paint by numbers and other shenanigans. And of course, YouTube. We put our content up on YouTube, and that's where the majority of people actually view it. And I'm on youtube.com/DewangoAC there.
All right, I think I think that's pretty much all we asked. And Carl, do you have any more?
Yeah, I guess I have just one more. This is probably kind of a softball question, but is there out of I'm sure you've done speed runs of like a ton of different games at this point.
I
But
personally
is there
have not done too
one-
many, but there are a couple.
But is there but sort of like is there one that is kind of like sort of out there on the horizon that's kind of like that like for some reason or another you haven't gotten around to yet or haven't gotten a hold of it or something like that that you would really love to do a task run of?
I would obviously like to finish NetHack. But basically, there's two sides of me. There's the doing stuff on real hardware, and then there's the making a tool-assisted speedrun in an emulator. And I just frankly haven't had much time to do much of that. I would ideally like to finish NetHack. But if there was a game that could be tasked, if I could task it, I would. It would have to be something along the lines of a Breath of the Wild task. And we actually made some inroads on trying to do that on the real Switch. In fact, at this year's Games Done Quick, we demonstrated Super Mario Maker 2 being played as a task on real hardware. So I would love to be able to make a task of Breath of the Wild. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but it's definitely possible. It's just not likely to happen anytime soon. As far as stuff I want to do on console, my pipe dream is pretty absurd. If what I've told you to this point sounded absurd, this is worse. In Japan, there was an add-on to the Famicom, the Super Famicom, their equivalent of the Super Nintendo, called Satellaview. And it received information directly from a satellite, which is now quite derelict. I think you might already know where we're headed with this. We want to resurrect that satellite and bounce a signal off of it, and with reverse-engineered hardware, stream data to a Satellaview-enabled console and do things with it.
That sounds... I honestly want to see that now. Just either that or make your own satellite.
I mean, Godspeed.
We are doing this legally. I don't always give away all of our secrets. And one of the mistakes we've made in the past is trying to be super secretive about what we're doing. And the reality is that maybe there's 10,000 people that will watch a tool-assisted speedrun on TAS videos. That's a big number, but we're going to expose this to 250,000 people at a Games Done Quick event. So while I'm kind of giving away our secrets of what we would like to do in the future, on the other hand, I'm inviting people to join us on the adventure to get there. And even if 10,000 people hear this podcast and are spoiled, if you will, about what we have in mind, even if they heard it and remembered it the entire time, when they actually saw it, it would still be entertaining. So rather than trying to focus on being completely spoiler-free, I'm much more likely to talk about what projects we have coming up and invite people who have necessary skills to participate. In this case, we need people with contacts. We need people who have the ability and the licensing to actually send a signal to the satellite and do this above reproach. In fact, everything we do, as you've seen with my stack of cartridges, everything I do is above reproach. When I play Super Mario World, I have a copy of Super Mario World. I don't cheat. And we want to do the same thing with a project like this. We want to get an actual licensed Spectrum ability to send a signal to a satellite, and that's just going to require resources. So where do we find these people?
Wait, Carl, my brain's working. Word hack.
What? What about word hack?
I feel like wouldn't those guys be able to help him out?
Possibly. I mean, that's.
I know it might be a tall order, but
Oh, everything we do is a tall order.
Word hack is a sort of is a monthly salon series we do that's presentations from sort of people working in kind of the literature sphere, but there's a like sort of working on sort of like, you know, like code literature, e-literature, that kind of thing. But there is a community of kind of sort of creative technology people that come and that sort of like come specifically for that event that might be probably would, you know, it's not out of the question that someone in that group of people have some knowledge that could come to bear on this. I don't know for sure though.
Could be fun.
just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, I'm never not going to plug Word Hack, you know? It's a good event.
I mean, I saw a moment, I went for it. But, yeah, I mean, I think this was a pretty good interview. I mean, again, Alan, thank you so much for talking to us.
Sorry I ramble so much.
Oh no, I enjoyed all of it. Don't worry about that. Carl, again, thanks for hanging out and explaining your side of things. And you, the viewer, thank you. And yes, I'm going to use that finger close up. But yeah, if anything, you can follow Duango AC on, well, you already plugged in your Twitter, but again, watch his stuff on AGDQ. It's really good. Hit us up at Baby Castles. We do things. And other than that, bye, I guess.
Withfriends.co/babycastle/join. We need your support. Venmo is good too. Anything, PayPal, you know.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. I do have a
plugs.
Patreon to help me defray costs of all the travel I have to do and all the equipment. This equipment is not cheap. So, but I'm not trying to plug that. So thank you very much for having me. It's been a fun interview. Thanks for letting me chat about all the things I care about.
Thank you.
Thank you.